The federal government has agreed to lift bans on some beef imports from the United States in the face of looming trade tariffs from the Trump administration.
Is Australia compromising its biosecurity to appease Donald Trump? The Albanese government has relaxed rules for US beef imports.
How do you like your steak? Rare, medium rare, or American? Whatever your preference, you're about to get more choice. Australia has lifted its long-standing ban on US beef imports, but how will this affect Australian farmers and one of our nation's most iconic activities, the Great Australian Barbecue? Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones, and this is the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. Do you remember Donald Trump's Liberation Day speech back in April? Well, he gave a good shout out to Australian beef, and suddenly everyone who enjoys a good steak dinner was thinking, I better stock up. So what has happened to Australia's beef industry since that speech, and why now has the Australian government agreed to buy US beef again? To help me answer those questions, I'm delighted to welcome Bloomberg's Melbourne-based agriculture reporter, Ben Westcott, to the podcast. Ben, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Ben, we know sitting here in Melbourne that most Aussie beef that we eat, or rather I eat, you're a veggie, I beg your pardon, comes mostly from cattle stations in Queensland, New South Wales and the NT. Can we perhaps start right at the beginning? I'm interested to know what role the Australian beef industry plays in the local economy and also in the global supply chain.
Well, I mean, if you take a look around the world, we have these impressions of massive beef industries across the globe, in the US, the ranches out there, and then down in Brazil, which is costing obviously huge amounts to the Amazon rainforest. But would it surprise me to tell you that Australia is the second largest beef exporter in the world?
It would.
Yeah, we are the second largest. So it goes Brazil, who are huge, then us, and then it goes back and forth between India and the US. But Australia plays a massive role in the global beef trade, and that's only getting more and more important now as global production of the important food essential is starting to slump around the world. So it's huge in Australia in the fact that it's such a big part of the national identity, it's such a big part of our diet, but also we are a major and important supplier to the world, and at this particular moment, an incredibly important one.
So when and why did Australia decide to ban US beef, and why is this coming to a head now, Ben?
So it was back in 2003 during an outbreak of mad cow disease, as it's known, in the US. And that ban for about 15 years. It finished up in 2019. So that was when we officially ended the ban on US meat coming into Australia. Now, I know what you're thinking immediately. You're thinking, wasn't it just lifted now? Well, yes and no. So that was a ban on meat that was born in the US, slaughtered in the US, and exported to Australia.
Right.
But the ban that remained was on meat that was imported, born in Mexico or Canada, then brought to the US and slaughtered and then exported. That was the beef that was banned by Australia for a further 6 years until it was lifted this year by the Albanese government.
So are there still biosecurity concerns around this imported beef? I mean, you only have to go through any airport here in Australia to realise, we take these things pretty seriously.
Australia is not a chill country when it comes to biosecurity.
Absolutely not.
And that's with very good reason. Putting aside our enormous and diverse ecosystems that no rest of the world has, we also have such an important and massive agriculture industry that relies on Australia being pest-free from so many of these various diseases and parasites. So Albanese government insists that there has been an extensive, I think they say decade-long study that has cleared US and subsequently Canadian and Mexican beef as being perfectly okay to import into Australia, and that's why they're lifting the ban now. So it seems unlikely they would have gone ahead with this if there was a risk. However, there has been calls from people like farmers and like the National Party in Canberra, who are often supportive of rural industries, calling for a bit of an inquiry to find out just what is the science behind this and to make sure that the government didn't move hastily on this in a bid to appease the US president.
Right. That's interesting because, on the face of it, in amongst all of this tit-for-tat tariffs that we're seeing around the world, it does seem kind of a coincidence that this is happening at around the same time that we're seeing such actions coming out of the US. I do wonder, Ben, is beef a sacrificial lamb, to take the heat off some other industries which are important to Australia, like steel and pharmaceuticals, things that Donald Trump seems quite focused on?
Look, we don't know for sure, but I think there is no doubt that when looking at the things which Australia could compromise on, this was a relatively small matter. And we'll come back to it, I think, later in this podcast, but Australia does not import a lot of beef from the US. And so, therefore, agreeing to relax these was something that could potentially create a few, murmurs, a few worries around biosecurity, but was not going to really impact any industries in comparison to if the Albanese government compromised on pharmaceuticals, which could cause drug prices to spike across the country. So really, if they were looking to appease Donald Trump, this was a place they could do it. And certainly the US president was, to use an Australian word, chuffed when he heard about this. We saw him send out in his Truth Social that Australia had backed down and had agreed to import huge record numbers of beef from America. So he seemed thrilled by this, and that might be the reaction the Albanese government was hoping for.
And those were Donald Trump's words, of course, the back down. So bottom line, Ben, let's just stick on the global elements of this issue for now. What will this mean for trade talks between the US going forward? Is opening up our beef market going to make any real difference there, even if it's just a perception of it?
I think we'll have to see, really, because the big, what Donald Trump is focused on any particular day varies greatly from week to week. And we saw that very soon after this deal with Australia was announced, we did keep the 10% ground tariffs in the next announcement of tariff levels that the president made. However, very shortly before that, he started to lash out at countries that were taking advantage of the US pharmaceutical system and basically saying that there would be up to a 200% tariff on drug prices. So it's a bit unpredictable as to whether or not this will appease him or whether or not this is just the end of this particular battle and the war will rage on. We'll have to wait and see how it goes from here.
When we come back, we often hear about the hard-scrabble existence of Australian farmers, but what does the future really look like for them, with more variety in the supermarket meat section? This is the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. Welcome back. I'm Rebecca Jones and you're listening to the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. Today I'm joined by agriculture reporter Ben Westcott. So Ben, we know that farming in Australia is a boom-bust kind of industry. How are cattle farmers going this year? We've had a bit of rain lately.
Well, it was funny, after the most recent really positive beef export numbers came down, I called around a few cattle farmers expecting to hear whooping and throwing of akubras in the air. And instead, there was a lot of real stoicism about this. I mean, there was a feeling that these numbers are good, people are very happy to see it, but they're just coming out of quite a nasty drought in recent years, or in the case of some of our northern New South Wales farmers, really nasty flooding. And so, although these high beef prices around the world mean that they can help get back on their feet, they can restock, they can, put some extra money into feed, hay prices are through the roof. So all those things are great. There's no feeling that this is a really long-term situation. I mean, a couple of years maybe at most. And there's also a feeling that they have to take the good times while they can, because there'll be more bad times later. So, as you mentioned, boom bust, and I think our farmers are quite stoic in the face of that.
Yeah, we recently had some fresh data, right, on the red meat trade between Australia and the US. Ben, have Donald Trump's comments made any impact on how much is being shipped so far?
Well, if they have, we haven't really seen it yet. Australian exports to the US hit another record recently. We exported about 40,000 tonnes. That was in July to the US, and that was up more than 10% on the previous month. Now, in comparison, the US, from the US to Australia, we imported about 300 tonnes.
Right. Big difference.
That was last year, but it hasn't shot up since then. So you can see there the difference in the amount that Australia exports to the US versus how much we import from them. And that's just because we have excess. We have a huge industry and a small population. The US has a huge appetite for red meat, enormous, and they import from all around the world. As I mentioned, Australia, Brazil, all over the place. But we are very happy to state that, particularly at a time when they have some real shortages due to drought, due to herd numbers slipping, and at a time when places like Brazil and Canada, who they normally rely on, are seeing a fall in production.
So, on that, are there any hints that US beef is going to be flooding our markets?
Not at all. And I mean, even if you put aside that 400 tonnes figure I mentioned, the US herd is going to take a long time to rebuild. I mean, there's a reason why they are seeking out Australian beef, apart from obviously its quality and its the large amounts that are out there. They're also seeking it out because their own herd numbers are at a 70-year low. They've had to slaughter huge numbers of their stock to keep up with demand, and they haven't been able to repopulate those quite yet. And so what we're seeing is that it's going to take them at least 18 months, 2 years to get their herd numbers back up to a point where, prices are starting to drop for US meat, and that's still a while away. So until then, Australian farmers will be making hay while the sun shines.
I'm interested about the differences between the American offering versus the Australian. What are they? They taste about the same?
I mean, as you mentioned, I'm a vegetarian, so I can't really comment.
You're the wrong person to ask that question to.
But
what
I will say is that a lot of US beef is corn-fed, whereas Australian beef is grass-fed quite often. And it's a different consistency of meat. What you often hear a lot is for US burgers, they often need Australian meat to combine with their US meat to make the patties, because the US meat is too fatty, it's too it falls apart too easily, it doesn't make for a very good burger patty. If you combine it with Australian beef, it holds it together, it makes for that sort of shape, that consistency people are used to. So they're very, very reliant on Australian meat to make one of their favourite foods over there.
I appreciate that answer, and I understand it is all academic for you, Ben. Finally, what is increased variety at the supermarket going to mean for the cost of our barbecue essentials here in Australia? Is more meat going to mean overall more cheaper meat for Australia?
Well, and I always encourage people to check out the Bloomberg Barbecue Index, which is a great indicator of where these prices are up to. What people are amazed at around the world is that, normally what would happen if there is huge demand for a product, prices will go up, and that's what we're seeing around the world. Beef prices are going up as there's more demand for beef, and there's no more demand than anywhere than in Australia. Australia is huge at the moment. That has not translated into higher prices in Australian supermarkets. I mean, certainly not compared to the US or the EU, where prices are up 10% or something. In Australia, it's up, much lower, much closer to the, regular inflation number. And that's just because supply is plentiful in Australia. And so although there's been a lot of noise at the top, we've heard about this deal with the US, we've heard about US imports, we've heard about high beef prices. When it comes to Australians in the actual supermarkets, prices are going to be pretty relaxed. For this, at least, lamb's incredibly expensive right now. But for beef, it's going to stay pretty low, and I wouldn't really expect to see US beef flooding Australian shelves anytime soon.
Food for thought. Ben Westcott, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Beck.
If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to follow the Bloomberg Australia podcast wherever you listen, and check for more on Australia's response to US tariffs and the ever-evolving trade situation, including the latest reporting from Ben Westcott on Bloomberg.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. It was produced by Paul Allen and edited by Ainsley Chandler and Chris Burke. I'm Rebecca Jones, and I'll see you next week.